We begin. Do we have a representative of the state? Caldari State.
Well, that was where I was, so
Cool.
I mean,
Yeah.
I will, if anybody else shows up, I'll cede that to them, but as of now, I can do that.
No, I'm not talking about like being a formal ambassador. I just want to make sure that we have somebody from every perspective at the very minimum.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Do we have anybody from Mimitar? Okay, we'll keep waiting for that. Do we have anybody from the Amar?
Technically, I am.
Okay. So, this is actually this has been the struggle that I ran into with my podcast too, is that like finding people to represent or come forward about the Mimitar and the Amar has been kind of a challenge. Like I said, if we don't get quorum right now, then I can punt this to next week because I realized that it was totally my fault that there wasn't enough warning. So now that we know when it's going to be, if it doesn't work out today, then we can just do it next week. No skin off my back. And I apologize that this whole thing has been so poorly arranged. I have some excuses, but I'm not even going to use them.
I mean, you gave going to be Wednesday. You pushed it forward a week again, and you presented like 5 options for a time zone. That's fair enough.
Well, I should have done that on Sunday. So the big issue was that there was a lot of complication between me and I can't remember his name because he's Matt. Me and Matt about whether or not I had permissions to make an announcement. So like he kept thinking that he had given me the permissions I needed, but then I wasn't able to do it, and so that created a big delay. And then whatever. So I mean, like I said, I could have definitely have been more on it. So if it doesn't work, then we just punt it to next week and we'll be good. And then everybody will have a week of warning.
Yeah, all right, no problem. If you get a lot of background noise on my part, let me know. I can mute my phone by a.
You're actually pretty quiet. I'm going to turn you up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm using a Bluetooth headset right now.
I see. By the way, Valamir, the Galente helped synthesize the drug that was used to help free some of the Mimitar from the Vitok. The Amar have this drug that they forcibly distribute to the Mimitar, which basically have a withdrawal symptom of death. So if you don't continue to get it from your holder, then you will die. And so that's one of the ways that they control the Mimitar is through this drug called Vitok. And so the Galente helps synthesize I don't think it was the antidote, but basically synthetic Vitok, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it is a bit like that. I also know that, like, so when the Blood Raiders bombed the Conid planets with Deathglow, which Deathglow is the drug that gets used in the accelerators that we use. They bombed it with raw Deathglow, and that created it was a hallucinogen, and it caused a lot of the Mimitar to like free themselves from the control, and so there's this big Mimitar uprising, and then they butchered a whole bunch of them. Like you do. So do we have any representatives from the Mimitar?
Insert cricket chirping sound here.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew that I needed to give at least like a week of worth of warning, and I didn't, and it, like, I don't know, I was frustrated, but like I said, I'm not going to try to make a bunch of excuses, because that's not the point. We're just going to try to fix it and keep on moving.
Do you have any idea what the main topic of the discussion is going to be?
So the goal would be to hash out some of these same things that we've been talking about and try to get, like, an idea of where we are at when it comes to major pain points, and solutions that we can, so kind of the same stuff that we've been talking about, like the voting channels and whatnot, but having it be like here, and so we can chat about it and argue and figure out what we agree on and what we don't agree on.
I think we all pretty much agree on deplexing needing some kind of passive nature to it.
You mean plexes wind down when they're not being ran?
No, I mean like when your home system gets hit like 1 or 4% every day on your off time TZ.
Oh, that's interesting. I actually hadn't heard that one yet. So you want systems to eventually, like, over time, decay towards the defender?
Yeah, pretty much over time to settle down back to stable.
I'm going to put on a commercial, and then when we get back, we'll see one more time whether or not we got enough people. And if not, like I said, we can try again next week, and we just can continue running invasions for now. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I want to have this conversation, is because, like, I didn't know what the, that wasn't on my track of one of the things that people wanted to have changed.
It's one of the points. Go ahead.
I'm of the opinion, the opposite camp here. I think the warfare happens on too slow a time frame to be engaging. There's a lot of plexing that you have to do to even flip a system.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, one could afford the other. Like, it could tend passively towards uncontested, and thus also require less to go from 0 to vulnerable. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Like, make it so that, like, balance it so that if you get every single plex in a single day, basically, however many plexes that is, set it so that that's the amount it takes to go from 0 to fully contested.
I think that's pretty reasonable. Like, I don't know. I'm just like I like to feel that I have an effect on, a certain system. So like if I'm going to invest my 15 minutes of time taking a plex or however long that takes, I'm going to fend it, shoot back at people that are coming into that plex.
Right.
It's nice to see that bar actually move, where in some cases you won't see that bar move even if you take 3 or 4 plexes. That's the way it stands now.
I mean, I'm not exactly trying to push a passive drop that's so high that your own work individually would be undone. It's
Right.
really low.
Yeah.
But low enough to where you don't sign on every day, and all you do instead of running a fleet is sign on your out and have to deplex 5 or 6 or 7 plexes, and by then you're kind of out of steam.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
can definitely support like an active participation in the conflict, right? So like if the attacker is not making aggressive moves to take that system, then yeah, it should probably go back to where it was.
The main thing I would want to see, I mean, obviously I don't think we're going to do the full scale roundtable tonight, so we'll just do it next time, and that's fine. But we can powwow about it for just a few minutes, informally, I guess. But I still think that the main thing that I would like to see is I want to see the bonuses for tier of a system, not faction warfare as a whole, but like the tier of the actual system, the bonuses that you get within that system, I'd like to see them buffed or at least made meaningful in a very exciting way, and then make it so that it only applies to structures that are owned by a faction warfare or a member of that militia. Which means two things. One, it kind of helps with that Warzone ownership thing, where you can, maybe you can't lock them out, but you can make it so that they lose their advantage in their structure. And at the same time, what it does is it makes it so that militias can effectively offer a service to those that are allied with them, right? Like if things cost less fuel or things cost less to manufacture in structures that are made by faction warfare people that are maintained and are winning, then that is an advantage that is not just LP based to being in control of your own area.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement there, Ash.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good idea.
I've
They can
also
always be-
Go ahead.
They could also be reduced production times, not necessarily less cost.
Well, so the reason why I use those examples is because that's what they are right now. I think it's reduced fuel and then reduced cost for, not the actual like production, but like the actual cost of putting in the job. Because, you know, there's an index, so the more industry you do in any one system, the more it costs to do industry in that system. That cost is reduced by...
It's naturally really low already in low sectors,
right.
You know?
Yeah, and that's what my point is that the issue is that those bonuses end up not being particularly interesting, and because it's not tied to the actual person who's owning it, then it almost doesn't matter, right? Like a pirate doesn't care who owns a specific system, only that the owner keeps it at 5. And so if the owner doesn't keep it at 5, then maybe they'll go make a deal with the other guys. But I still love the idea that it would be tied to faction warfare equipment. Also, I would like to reopen the idea that was pitched as we went through Inferno discussions, which is giving faction warfare groups a Sino jammer that can be used in systems that are at a certain tier or higher.
I think faction warfare is actually lacking in a lot of like in-space bonuses. So the majority of the bonuses you get from owning a system are going to be taxes or clones or, you know, the industry that you were talking about. I'd love to see like, you know, faction police patrolling the area or control of gate guns in a certain area for certain fractions or something. That's a little bit extreme, but like point defense might be neat, or special sites that spawn, something like that. So encourage people to get out in space, you know.
I agree with that. I think that's a good point where when I lived in Black Rise, it didn't mean much else. You didn't really care so much aside from like the pride level of like, all right, we're in this tier. That's about all the information, you know, that's all that our control of this area affects me. I agree. I think something else to incentivize that, to make people want to go out and push the percentages is key.
Yeah. So there's an interesting, one of the interesting issues that I run into when it comes to talking to people about faction warfare is this idea that like faction warfare players expect faction warfare to be almost exclusively PvP. There's this idea of like, don't let PvE get into my PvP. This is actually not baked into faction warfare, but certain changes like the Plex changes that happen within Inferno certainly reinforce that fact. And so what happens is that Orb, you're hot micing and like there's background noise, and I don't know if that's what you want to have come across.
No, my wife.
Yeah.
Let me mute my...
Yeah, no problem. All right, so, but, like, I guess that's my question is that what, if any, level of PvE are people wanting within their faction warfare? So, for example, these Triglavian sites represent a much more complex enemy and more interesting scenarios. Would it be interesting for there to be different scenarios than just the one rat and a Plex that can be part of the faction warfare universe, maybe to replace missions or something like that? Or is everybody of the opinion that it's like, no, we should focus basically everything on making PvP happen?
I absolutely think more interesting scenarios definitely have a place.
Okay.
As do I.
Same.
I think that there's two things that causes that mentality to spring up. One is the way it used to be, and then the other is Plex farmers, right? So, you know, we look at the people that are in it for money as being like cockroaches because they're giant problems to us. So the question is, how can we make it so that the people who are wanting to do it to make money and engage in like the PvE side of things isn't being pushed to be doing like literally the worst behaviors? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that was exactly what I was going to bring up is
Yeah.
not only from the action, but even just like the perception of, you know what I mean? You even touched on the other side of it, which is like faction warfare is PvP. Don't get your PvE in my PvP. And just that, yeah, there's
Mission
a culture
farmers.
schism that I would worry about, even though I think there's an undoubted benefit to bringing that kind of PvE content in, and you would get more than just quote unquote crabs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that they have a avenue to make kind of like hybrid sites, right? You could do something with NPCs in a specific site, let's say a defensive site that something is already deployed there, and then there's a control point that you would take that would be more interesting than just a single NPC spawning at that control point.
Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
Well,
I
yeah.
think that one of the things that could happen is that as a system gets plexed up higher, maybe that unlocks different types of things that could then, like the what I was thinking about is in invasions there's the Zorias, right? And the roaming packs can also have Zorias. So what if when you get past a certain threshold, you actually get roaming packs of the defending Empire's squads, but then if you kill their team leaders, that actually counts towards victory points. So it's a different way to push a system into vulnerable.
that's, yeah, huge. Exactly what I'm talking about. Another cool thing that they might be able to do is like a communications hacking minigame or something, you know, that somehow affects the way information is being distributed in the area.
Yeah, I do like the idea. Like I said with the Sino thing, the Sino Jammer thing, I like the idea of giving faction warfare people limited abilities to make temporary controls over their system. So not literally solve, but make it so that like I can deploy an item that for an hour creates a Sino Jammer or something like that. That could then, of course, still be attacked or whatever. But
which could be very strategically relevant. Yeah,
right.
I like it.
Yeah. So as long as you
Absolutely.
keep them up, you can lock down a system.
I'm not sure if you've heard the counter to that. That was actually there in the time of Inferno, and why we didn't they didn't pursue the development of that idea.
Please tell
And
me.
it was mainly for PL groups that complained about, hey, what if they have an operation, let's say, and they're going to Sino into nullsec. If there's a faction warfare out that suddenly deploys a Sino in their capital nullsec system, then that's going to interrupt
I think that's perfect, though.
their project.
I think that's great, because that means either A, you have to not use faction warfare systems, B, target faction warfare systems that you know are low enough tier that they can't do it, or C, coordinate with the faction warfare team to make sure that you have that you will be eligible to move through the systems. That's like saying that, oh well, a nullsec group that's trying to get to a different nullsec group can't move through a third person's nullsec group because they have Sino Jammers. Woe is me. Like that. Yeah, we have the ability to affect the sandbox, and that effect of the sandbox will affect other people's attempt to use things or do things. I don't know. I don't see that as a reason to not do it.
Well, this idea came before the changes to being able to capital. It's not that big of an issue anymore. You can take one gate out and still still take a sign.
Let me be clear. Hold on. I want to talk to non-watchers talking in the channel. I want to make sure to say something really clear. You don't actually need to fix the problem with Plex farmers directly, okay? Because Plex farmers are cockroaches, and cockroaches can't exist in the light. So even when faction warfare was super active, when faction warfare was super active, the only places that Plex farmers could go was when where there wasn't active conflict. So as the conflict kind of moved around, you would see like in the shadows where people weren't, that's where people would go and do their plexing. So you could like go to a more active area if you know you want to fight, and you can go to a less active area if you know, or if you want to just make some money real quick, hopefully without necessarily making a fight. And I like that dichotomy. And so the solution here, in my opinion, isn't necessarily absolutely stopping Plex farmers, although I think that these changes like no stabs, no cloaks, no ventures are great. What it really should do, what we should be focusing on, is how do we incentivize people being in those plexes combat fit, ready to go? Because if a Plex has a combat ship in it, then it can't have a Plex farmer in it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Another thing from a PvP balance perspective, the sites are gated, and that's fine, but that kind of lends to like a brawl mentality rather than a kite mentality, especially the brawlers in the site prior to a kiter. Getting off that button is really, really hard. I'd love to see more sites that are like the larges, that you can warp in from any angle, but in a smaller base that would restrict it to a frig or a cruiser size. And maybe even a pairing of two sites that say that like you have to win in a brawling site as well as a kiting site to make progress here. I wouldn't say that as like a hard rule, but it's just an idea that you could play with.
So what I'm hearing overall is that we would like more variety in the kind of sites that we run into. So some sites maybe promote brawling more, some sites promote kiting more.
Yeah, some sites are defended by NPCs, some sites are being attacked by NPCs, some sites might require a hacking, stipulation or whatever.
Yeah. On the most extreme side, I would like to see a site that disrupts you anytime that you are actively running the timer, or contributing to whether or not the timer is being run. In other words, if you're in a faction warfare or in a militia and you are in a Plex, you are warp disrupted. I'd also like to see. I'd also like to see. Crap! I lost the rest of it.
Well,
Oh, well.
You remember whatever it is you were talking about. Let me talk about that.
Please.
That warp disruption while inside the Plex. I don't like it because it changes the meta. I mean, you can have a dedicated vessel fighting inside of a Plex and completely ignore disruptors and scrams and just fit double webs. You can. I think it changes way too much of the. As for kiters and brawlers, it really cuts both ways, because if you have a kiter that establishes himself inside of a Plex, it's going to be hard for you as a brawler to try to catch him if you're not good at slingshotting.
So
likewise, it's impossible for a kiter to warp in on a brawler who's already established in the Plex, giving the defender a really big advantage.
I remember back in the day, there was a suggestion that the rats that spawn in can scram or disrupt. But again, a lot of people did not want. There's something that people were against, with the idea that something about the environment would alter the otherwise pristine player versus player encounter. I don't know if necessarily that's like a hard rule that needs to exist, though. Like, I think it'd be interesting if, like, it just so happens that the rat spawns while you're fighting, and that changes the fight somehow. Like, I don't mind that the rat would then warp disrupt you. Yeah, NPC third party, exactly.
Perhaps it would have to be something that didn't happen all the time, because if it did happen all the time, what he's saying is like people would just start fitting double web, and
Right.
that's a pretty big advantage to go into. Just like some people would fit triple scram to catch plexers, who are fitting warp core stabs. but they wouldn't be able to fight against a combat fit ship with that fit.
Yeah. So, by the way, Tristan, since you just joined us and there's other people that joined us too, we are probably going to reconvene next week for a more formal roundtable because I didn't give enough people enough warning this time. But we're just chatting for a little bit while we're here. Collecting thoughts maybe so that way next week can be more focused in. But we're more just talking about like establishing what the problems are and whether or not there's more like just random brainstorming, I guess.
Do you guys think that the switching of sides is a problem for faction warfare?
So there's two parts to that problem, right? Like I think that standings is way too big of a problem. I think that that's a big barrier to entry to a lot of players. Like even if the standings issue isn't that real, it's enough of a threat that it makes it so a lot of people don't try faction warfare at all. That being said, I think that it could easily be done where if you're part of one militia, there's like a cooldown that makes it so that you're ineligible for that militia, the other militia, for a period of time, be it like a month or so.
Right. I think that's very reasonable. Oftentimes you might see like a large influx of people that are just moving to the winning side to get more LP, which I think
Definitely see that with mission forms.
I remember kind of what I was going with before a little bit, but there's two big things that I think needs to be fixed when it comes to faction warfare. One is the rewards, right? The reward side of things, how LP is distributed, what gives LP versus other things, and like things like the Warzone control stuff, like the bonuses that I was talking about earlier. Making it so Warzone ownership and the act of gaining and maintaining Warzone membership or ownership is the thing that is rewarded. The idea that a group can be part of faction warfare and have we don't care about Warzone control be like the stance to have, I feel is wrong. I feel that means that Warzone control has not been properly rewarded. Or the act of trying to regain Warzone control, coming back from behind or whatever. The other thing that I think it's missing is feedback. I would like to see a report weekly that comes out that basically says, these are the people, these are the top plexers, this is what you have done in the last month, this is how many victory points you've produced in the last month, and therefore you get this bonus. The Federation thanks you for your service, all this kind of stuff. Some sort of feedback that lets you know how your team is doing and what you need to be doing to contribute to the forces. I'd really like it if there is dynamic events, right? Like maybe Rodin selects the Intaki constellation as like the current target focus, and so there's extra stuff going on there, or maybe better rewards for people going there. The state, of course, brings in their own interest, and tie it all together to kind of make the war zone a little bit more even artificially dynamic. And then with those set events, right, that does two things. One, it offers an opportunity for people to be like, I'm going to dip in and try faction warfare for a week, right? Because something's going on. The Federation needs you, or the state needs you, or whatever it is. And likewise, or on the other side, make it so that feedback exists after a campaign. Then you can get a little thing that basically shows what you've done, what your corp has done, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think we already have a kind of obscure ranking system for like the militias. You can gain ranks, but it's not very emphasized. This is kind of a crazy idea, but like, what if the show info tab on your character changed color based on your rank in a militia if you chose to like display that? Like give us a special window. Give us a special window or a special insignia that like show info on a character is something that you do pretty often. You can display your rank on your character sheet. It would be interesting if you could like have it appear like on your actual image, like almost like a Tech 2 little flag or whatever, but like a little doodad in the lower right. Or like the borders that you get. This is a terrible analogy, I guess, but League of Legends gives you borders for your rank. So you could have your show info window be silver or something, to signify rank.
Clothing items only available when you're in that level.
Yep,
Or
when
rank.
you're in that. Yep, exactly.
The issue
It's
with
like-
the rank is it's tied to standings, and just a quick mission run will easily put you at the top of. I think, if anything, it should be tied to the activity tracker and your actual participation in faction warfare
Yeah.
through iHub and Plex captures.
Well, this goes
I
back to
agree, yeah.
rewards, right? Like, I think that the entire mission system of faction warfare should probably be replaced whole cloth.
Should be deleted.
Yeah. Well, replaced. There should be some different. Deleting is part of replacing, yes.
Deleted with no replacement.
Well, I mean, like, replace it with something like I was talking about earlier, where there's, like, different extra scenarios that can be gone and done as a team to gain extra LP and, like, push the war zone in that direction a little bit more. The real
If you
issue
think
is
of,
that missions
like,
are
the
completely
scenario
detached.
Of plexing versus mission. For plexing, you have to be in a qualifying ship in a set place for a set amount of time.
Right.
And that generates PvP content. Whereas in a mission, you can just game it. You can do crappy insta-warp jackdaws. You can blitz a mission in 30 seconds with a Macarial. That doesn't generate content for anyone.
Correct.
Yeah.
It
No,
just generates profit for people who jump into the winning side at the last minute for the purposes of benefiting their own wallets.
Yeah. On top of that, the sites are gated. They're actually really, really, really hard to catch people.
Also, as Sigma is pointing out, missions tank your opposite standings, and that's actually part of the problem, right? As I said, the destruction of standings is actually one of the reasons why people don't even try faction warfare. So on almost every level, missions actually cause more problems than they solve. Is anybody willing to defend missions in faction warfare? Because I think it's pretty consensus that missions are not liked, but I mean, I've heard counter arguments for all kinds of different things. I want to give it an opportunity. Does anybody actually think that missions should exist as they are in faction warfare?
Well, as everything stands right now, they are pretty much the only larger scale source of LP that you can get. So if you ever plan on buying things like faction battleships, for example, you're going to have a hard time doing that with just plexing.
Right.
I think I kind of disagree with that. An offensive Plex in Tier 4 gives you like 94,000 LP. Like, if you can do a large.
I don't think that opportunity for loyalty points should disappear, but I am completely 100% fine with it not being tied to those god-awful missions. Because I loved the LP, but I hated the missions.
Like I said, I would like to see it tied to some sort of like Plex 2.0, like scenarios that have to go be done that are not like a mission that you go and get that's made specially for you, but maybe in particularly contested zones, there spawn special sites that then could be, if you can exploit them, will give you extra rewards and extra victory points.
Right, and I think that they should be things that do the same thing that Tristan just said, where it's a worthwhile activity for a group of 3 or 4, whatever people to go and like stay in this area for a set amount of time, where then a roaming group can come in and drop on them, and then boom, we have PvP content with things to gain on both sides.
Right. The key to me is that, so actually this goes back to what I started saying earlier and then skipped over it. So I think one of the reasons why faction warfare has kind of this natural aversion from PvE is because of the old system of plexes, right? So for those of you who are not that old, before Inferno, there used to be, actually, well, even at the beginning of Inferno, plexes actually was full of rats, and the button was 40 kilometers from the beacon. So you were supposed to fight the rats, but ultimately that ended up not being a really valid. So the problem was is that you would need a PvE ship to fight these rats, and probably like a cruiser for some of them. But the issue is that obviously if you're in a PvE ship that's ready to fight these rats, you're not ready to fight other players. So you know, you just have to run. And so the solution ended up being a no gun incursus that speeds tanks the entire room while you orbit the button, and that was it. And so that's why plexes got dramatically changed to be what they are now. And even at the time, I said to Hans Jagerblitzen, the problem is that if you present a PvE problem, you're going to force a PvE solution, and therefore they're not going to be ready for PvP, and therefore they're not going to want to fight it. And so you need to create a scenario in which a PvP solution is satisfactory for the demand of this site. You know what I'm saying? So again, I go back to things like these invasion sites. I think that if you took something like these invasion scenarios, make them have to maybe scram, or, you know, like add just a little bit more, and you could make it so that a PvP fleet, or ship at least, is what's good at fighting these things. And therefore people can be able to run these sites while still being capable, and probably preferably capable, of also fighting other players. I think that's like basically where you need to want to go, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
So yeah, I think that
overcomplicate it a bit.
yeah, I just think that like the old style of things have made it so, like, when people think of PvE in faction warfare, they think of 50 rats in a room. That makes it so that it's not even about PvP at all. It's now about that. It's about the 50 rats in the room, right?
Why not make a Plex even simpler? Why not make it something like looting an ESF? So you warp to a thing, you're in a bubble, you have to stay within a set amount of range for a set amount of time to get a reward.
Well, the goal of having the rat there that you have to kill is to make sure that you must be this tall to ride the ride, right? Like, you can't show up in a, you know, 20 DPS Atron and...
Right now, if you're deplexing, you can show up in a completely unfitted hull and still get OP.
Right, defensive plexing, which is less rewarding. It used to be not rewarding at all.
No plex OP times by a system modifier.
Yeah. So the question is it still too rewarding? Or is... I personally believe that, like, one of the things that could fix all these problems, and I still believe this should be a thing, like, I want the agency to tell you every plex and whether or not they're being ran. I want to be able to look at my map and see where plexes are actively being run. I think that if you are attacking an enemy structure or an enemy system, then that militia should be being notified that they're under attack and to please come and help them, because otherwise, why are you part of the militia? Why wouldn't the state call for its militia to come in to help stop a plex?
Available.
Yeah, I think you can. Yeah, I don't know about that. That's a lot of information to just freely distribute, you know, for people who are engaging in combat activities.
Just
you have to go into space and look for people who are doing plexes.
I'll
I
link
think
you a
that's
screenshot
fine.
in general, but that shit is already available.
well, it's not. But what I'm saying is, it's not.
You can actually pull it from the ESI.
Yeah.
There's our bot that does
So we did this before. It's very similar to the one that we built before, although we have the map. We had the map that mapped it all out for us. But what I'm saying is that that's not an in-game tool. That's not going to help the average Joe. So, like, all I'm saying is that when you look it up on the agency, if a site is being ran, then color it by the color of the people who are currently making progress. Because I want if plexes are going to be a king of the hill experience, then maybe they should be a beacon to let other people know that there's somebody, you know, currently trying to be the king of the hill.
Then will that information be available to just people in faction warfare or to everyone?
I mean, it's a good question.
Maybe information like that should be restricted by the faction warfare mechanics itself.
And then what's to stop someone such as, for example, Snuff, just sticking an alt in faction warfare scene where everyone's plexing and going and ruining?
Well,
What's wrong with
I'm
that,
still
to
not
be
sure what the
honest?
problem is, because like these faction warfares are supposed to, or the plexes are supposed to be king of the hill fight initiators. So
You want to give real-time information to absolutely everyone in the game.
I think that while you sit in a Plex, it should be... I mean, when you light a Sino, anybody can see that you've lighted a Sino. So when you're running a Plex, people should be able to look to see if that Plex is being ran.
Yeah, but when you light a Sino on your Fortizar with an Ibis, is that the same kind of risk as sitting in a Plex for 15 to 20 minutes with a properly fitted ship?
You're not getting paid by your faction to light the Sino. You are getting paid to sit in a Plex ready to fight.
I think it could work out as long as the timer was shorter than 15-20 minutes.
That was another one of the extreme ones. Like, so actually, I'm gonna just open this up. What do you guys feel about Plex rollback? So there's 3 different levels. There's what it is now, where basically there's one slider where each side basically pushes it in their direction. So if it's 20 minutes and I run it for 19 minutes and then Kira comes to run it from the other direction, he actually has to run it for 39 minutes because he has to undo my 19 minutes and then do his time. So that's the way it is currently. There are a few other options. One is
glorification and mortification.
Thank you for the raid, dude. We're just discussing some faction warfare stuff. We're going to do this again next week probably, but it's a good opportunity to sit down and chat. But so what if... Shit, where was I?
Rollback.
Oh yeah. So the second way is like if I leave and there's somebody else who's valid in the Plex, then it resets down to 0 and starts ticking for them. Right? That's a strong enforcement to not leave. The third way would be if you're not in the Plex making progress, the Plex ticks down to 0. Right? So if you spin it up 5 minutes, then after 5 minutes it'll have ticked back down to 0. That's a less extreme version of the same thing. But then there's the third option, which is to make it so that the first side to collect 20 minutes wins, right? So if I collect 10 minutes and then somebody kicks me out and then they run it for 10 minutes and then I come back in and run it for 10 minutes more, I actually complete the site because I've completed a total of 20 minutes before they are able to complete a total of 20 minutes. Anybody have any thoughts about any of those 3 systems?
Yeah,
Maybe.
Can anyone give me a minute to speak on dual time?
Yes, go for it, Orb.
Dual timers is exactly that, the third option, where you have 2 separate timers, one for the offensive and for the defensive ticks. As for rollbacks, I'm not in favor of them because when I was playing, I ran small gang, and I would spread Plex in different systems and different objectives all the time. And if I would have to leave and suffer a rollback to help someone actually,
Right,
not necessarily just run away, that actually would hurt my progress in many ways.
Yeah, I think I'm on board with the second and third options just because it's pretty common to just happen upon like an abandoned Plex, and if you happen upon an abandoned Plex and you look at a 30-minute timer, where as opposed to like doing a site that's much less than that, you're never going to sit in that site for 30 minutes to get the same reward as...
right. And to be clear, if you do ratchet up the penalty for leaving, you can also shorten the time. Like, maybe it's only 5 minutes, but if you abandon it, it resets down to 0 or something like that. It doesn't have to be an isolated, or it doesn't have to be the only change that's done, if that makes sense.
So here's a question. On the dual timer system, if both factions are in the site, obviously they're going to be PvPing, do the timers just not move at all?
Yeah, you would assume that the current freezes would still take place while there's multiple factions inside the same region.
I'm not sure.
And
I actually kind of like the idea of them both ticking up, so that way they're both making progress. But yet, all things being equal, the people that were in there before the fight started will still win. So basically, you have to clear them out before they finish their timer. It's just because you're in it doesn't mean that they've stopped, but you have started too. I'm not saying that it has to be that way, but I'm just saying, like, I'm not sure where the design falls on that one.
I don't really see a situation where a kiting ship could kite for a very extended period of time, but like if you just tried. inside the, I think it's like 30 km, right? To be
Yeah.
inside that 30 km bubble and kite for a long time just to block the other situation. I don't think that would reasonably happen, but it could.
Hold on. Well, it's not quite like in Tosis because 30 kilometers is relatively short. Like, it's too easy to have a sniper that would still be able to peg you anywhere that you can be running the Plex, right?
The thing about not having freezes, I'd like to put in is when you know you only have like maybe a minute left, you can show up with a super tanked ship without any intention of fighting at all. Just sit there being a meat shield until your timer ticks to your side. I like the freezes. I like the radius being 30 kilometers. I'd like to keep that around in a dual tank.
Yeah, I think. Well, my point is that both options present different but interesting problems and solutions, right? Like the idea that somebody could like hyper tank it and just try to live long enough while the other side is trying to burn them through. That's actually kind of compelling to me because that reminds me of like you've grabbed somebody and you're now trying to kill them before their backup can show up, right? Like this idea of like the race to kill the thing before something, like that's compelling to me. So I'm not, but at the same time, I think that the simpler and quote unquote more fair solution would be, yeah, to freeze the timer.
I mean, it could get really stupid with like triple rep Merm or Deimos or whatever, you know?
Yeah, but if you've got merms, you're talking about a large. So, I mean, is it any more terrible than curses and mediums? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I could definitely be convinced to just keep it pausing.
Yeah, if the mentality of the people engaging in this conflict is to not fight but blue ball for as long as possible, that could be frustrating, but I don't really see it being a huge...
So unless...
because there's...
Sorry.
Just based on like, okay, if you're a triple rep merm, they're gonna bring newts at some point and then you're gonna die. Or if you're a super kite, whatever, max speed, trying to do just stay on grid, eventually they're going to bring something that can track or web you,
right,
and you're going to die.
Yeah, instead of thinking of the exact answer, the question is there a way to cheese it instead of actually like dealing with it directly? I think it's the larger, broader issue, not whether or not triple tank Myrmidons have a counter itself, because what will eventually become the option may not even necessarily be predicted now. It's just, does this offer the design opportunity space for something to emerge to function as like the Plex Stab Venture, where it's like it undermines the foundations of what's supposed to be happening, as it were.
Right, I mean, that's a very important point to think about, because the internet is very good at finding those.
So the other thing to consider as well is whether or not the task that you're setting can be automated. Because botting is becoming more and more prevalent in faction warfare, especially around plexing.
The issue with that is, like, anything that's PvE, basically, there's going to be an algorithm for it, more or less. So how... It's not whether or not it is bottable, it's whether or not it's more bottable or less bottable or worth it, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think making something not bottable is kind of a fool's errand, personally. But make it so that you can punish people in such a way. I don't know. But that being said, Alesis Wicked says, I don't think Plex timers are broken enough to require being looked at and changed over other areas that are way too broken and should be prioritized. So I'm curious as to what Alesis or anyone else believes is the higher priority. What stands as the thing that's holding things back that should be the highest priority?
I'd say it's the just the exploitability of faction warfare right now with the tiers and the LP payouts.
Well, Alesis, but farmers are directly related. Farmers and bots are directly related to the rules of how plexes work, right? So you don't fix farmers just by saying like, okay, well now we don't have farmers. You fix farmers by making a design space in which another option becomes Apex. A farmer can't be a non-combat farmer can't be in a Plex if there is a combat person contesting it, right? So how do we reward it in such that there is combat people that want to contest these sites? The bots and farmers only get to go where the real players aren't.
I think other guys have posted and discussed the options of doing kind of frontline tiers for plexing, rather than the entire war zone being open at the same time for plexing. It's focused on specific areas like kind of lines of combat. So this is the front line, one militia's on this side, the other militia's on the other side, and the only way you can advance either way is to push these specific systems.
Yeah, like agency, as in adjacency, rather. Sorry. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier with when it comes to dynamic events, where like certain regions or certain constellations could become priority, based on some dynamically constructed mechanic. Like as the now that the Galente is having a hard time, I still believe. So I personally, like in my dream, what we would have is the Galente has been in tier 1 for over a month. So now the Federation has decided that they got to do something about this. So they're going to do two things. One, they're going to double all LP payout that's in X constellation because we now want to take over this constellation. There's going to be extra stuff for prizes that can only be gotten during that time, like an event or something like that. Maybe access to special skins that can only be gotten for doing these special objectives. And then at the same time, increase the tax burden in HiSec in that region. So if the Galente are losing too much, too long, then the cost of things in HiSec it's just like this whole like the taxes pay for your fight against the Triglavians. If the Galente are having to put extra resources into their militia, that should be displayed through a penalty that is paid by HiSecers, which would then promote people that are not necessarily involved in faction warfare to want to attempt to manipulate it, or at least be interested in how it's playing out as a mechanism to have it be more interrelated. But that's my dream.
I don't think it promotes joining faction warfare as much as just punishes people who probably.
I mean, a lot of people are already. Sorry, I'm talking over you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think it's your turn.
Okay. A lot of people are already avoiding a lot of the tax systems via corporations and stuff. I think your idea in concept is very cool for like a region to be taxed based on a warfare. It says to all the people who are just doing their thing in HiSec, hey, there's a war going on. Like, hey guys, it's costing you money over here. Like, that's a very interesting and intriguing idea. On the other point, I think lines of battle, while I like the concept and pushing people into the same for conflict, into the same systems for conflict, I don't like the strategic stipulations that it puts on, like, oh, I can't do anything relevant behind enemy lines now. Like, I feel that that's kind of a sad point.
Well, what if there's something that you can do?
How about if like each constellation had a nominated capital, like nominated at random by CCP on behalf of the NPC militias. So for example, the constellation we live in, Ungated, if CCP picked the central system, which is asset, which isn't where we live and would piss us off a bit, but still. But the only way you can take Ungated from Amar is you have to take asset first, and then you can work out into all the other systems. So that would motivate Amar to defend that system. It would motivate Minmatar to take that system, and it would give you a specific system of conflict in each different constellation. And the only way you can take that constellation is to kick the opposing militia out of that one system first. Of course, there's multiple constellations per warzone, so you have the option of either going all hell bent in on one or spreading out across all the different constellations and trying to hit everything.
Do you imagine that capital system being the last thing that's taken, or the
No, it
focus
should
of
be
what
the
needs
first. To take the constellation, you have to take that system first.
So you take
Then
that
the rest
system
of
and that
the
makes everything else
constellations are
vulnerable?
for your militia. So whichever militia holds that capital can take the constellation.
Right.
So that reduces our playing field to those capital systems, essentially.
Initially, yeah.
Yeah, it would
Initially,
focus.
you have to take the capital to take the constellation.
Yeah, it would
And
focus.
then what's the point of taking the rest of the constellation?
Okay. Now you've taken asset, for example, you're free to plex the entire Ungated constellation and get all that help. I don't know about you guys, but I've done faction warfare for a long time, and
Yeah,
the things that really stick in my memory are the big system sieges. So
I agree.
for Mar Mimitar, that's always been things like Huola or Dal. It's never really been backwater system generic number 101.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm kind of the opposite. I enjoy going into the faction warfare area, and I'm not in faction warfare currently, but I like going into the area and kind of getting small skirmish engagements in backwater systems.
Yeah, and that's
But
the problem
also,
is that we've got so many different
Tristan's
kinds of
idea
players.
would also kind of imagine
Oh.
being on the side that
Sorry.
you'd remember when you lost your capital for like a month, and then you had to go, live out in the boonies and fight to get it back. I think that in the same way that Ash's point about higher taxes if a militia is struggling, these are both really things that are really cool ideas, and I like the idea of these microcosms and affecting other areas of the game, but I know they're not super refined ideas. I just worry about maybe unforeseen consequences, with both of them.
And that's why I was
They're
saying,
just
like,
kind of top of the head changes that have
No, but
things
yeah,
that just sprung to mind.
and that's
good
why
idea though.
that's why I was saying, like, what I would like to see is more play with the bonuses that faction warfare people get for tier, and allow them, basically require it to be associated with faction warfare, so it functions as like a service that can be offered, right? So again, like, I would like to see it to a point where a pirate group, like a non-militia organization, has their own interest on which side they want to own a system, because that's the side that they have agreements with. And so when you go to take the system, then the pirate will have reason to side with one side or another, because that side has bribed them basically through their services or that they can offer.
On the subject of pirates, I don't know if it's been brought up yet or not, but why is faction warfare just limited to 4 races? Why do not Blood Raiders, for example, want to get some territory, or Age of Control
Serpentis.
want to get some territory, or Serpentis? Yeah.
I think
Why
that
should it just be the 4 main races?
I think a lot of that is coming. I think that that's a lot of the Age of Chaos stuff and whatnot. So I hesitate to put too much into that, because a more dynamic universe with NPCs that are interested in their own objectives and attempting to achieve them is something that CCP is working on in a broader sense. So maybe.
Also, most of the pirate factions already own nullsec space in NPC capacity, at least little bits.
I
From
think
a
you
lore
would
point of
train
view,
wreck.
though, pirates incurring into low-sec territory would be
Yep.
quite interesting. I'd love
Absolutely.
to spread some Blood Raider Victor across this war zone.
So I kind of want to go back to being high level for just a second and talk about how there are 2 things that I've thought about now I lost one of my whole points, but the other one is I've thought about what faction warfare people are. Like, if you think about like EVE Online as an ecosystem or as a simulation of otherwise kind of real sort of world stuff, like if there are pirates and there's LowSec, which is kind of the piratey area, what do faction warfare members represent in this universe? and I think of them as privateers, right? So they are the people who work for the English and fight against the pirates, but they're no better than the pirates. They're the ones pocketing the man's money to go fight the people that are against the man, right?
Yeah, they have state approval to murder.
Right, yeah, exactly. State approval to murder. Thank you. So that's what I like to think of faction warfare people as.
Pretty much just pirates under the pay of the state.
Yeah. Barely better than pirates, right? And I caught my second point in the middle of that, and then I lost it again as I was speaking. So whatever, we'll keep going.
I like to think of a kind of like a food chain, with like faction warfare members. No offense to us all, because I love you all guys, but we're like the nullsec equivalent of ratters. We are the things that people come to hunt.
Right.
So you sitting in that plex in your frigate for 10 minutes, you are providing the content for someone to come roam and shoot.
Exactly.
If you shoot back at them and kill them, fucking bonus. You know, you've not only got your payout, you've got free content, you've got some free loot, and you've got a damn kill man.
Yeah. As I say many times, as faction warfare lives, lowsec lives. As faction warfare dies, lowsec dies. Like an active group of people that care about faction warfare is the single biggest force to making a vibrant lowsec, and it's demonstrably proven. Just if you evaluate the last decade or so of lowsec and its rise and fall, as it were. Yeah. Dang it! I keep literally coming up with remembering what it is that I want to say, and then when I go to actually like say it, it slips away again. So whatever, man.
Get yourself a notepad, Ash.
Thank you.
You need to drink more.
It's been a day, man. I didn't get enough sleep last night.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the pirate faction. I think if you don't fix the LP problem with missions and things like that, it's going to be an absolute train wreck for nullsec mission.
Okay, I remember what it was.
Do you not think though, if we completely train wreck nullsec missions with the LP problem, then the LP problem will suddenly become much more of a focus for everyone?
I don't understand. Can you please explain that a little bit about how you're... So, I don't know what a nullsec mission is and how we affect it. So, can you please...
Well, I'm mostly talking about the nullsec pirate mission.
I see.
I mean, that's where the pirate missions are. They're in nullsec. So, but if you introduce these pirate factions and you have equivalent of the missions for them, you're going to empty the nullsec out, or you're going to make their work absolutely worthless, because you're going to be able to make 4 million LP in a day, and that's currently kind of what the problem is. Like, and I agree with Waru, because it is the biggest issue with the tier manipulation at the moment. I mean, you can introduce them, and then suddenly it's something no one can ignore, and then we can get it fixed. But at the moment, that is the biggest issue.
Yeah, I agree that if you were to introduce something like pirate factions, you'd have to make sure not to disrupt the systems that already exist to provide faction warfare, or those pirate stuff. But my point, which almost seems not even as important given how much effort I've had to do to come up with it, but so I like to think about the place of faction warfare in EVE as a whole. And the way I like to think about it is that HiSec provides infrastructure for you, but also kind of dictates how things need to happen because of it. Like, it tells you how things are supposed to play out. And generally speaking, you have to follow the rules of in order to do the objectives that are HiSec. Everything's kind of dictated for you. Nullsec is the exact opposite. Everything is player driven. All of the infrastructure is player created, and all of the objectives are player created. But faction warfare represents that low sec middle ground, right? Where the objectives are external. There's an NPC faction that is telling us what's important, but how to do it and how to achieve those objectives, that is left to the players. And I think that if we can keep that in mind, I think that's how to get the best version of a faction warfare, is to remember that we are somewhere between a high-sec organization or a person running for the, you know, working for the man, and a null-sec alliance that is following their own rules. Sorry, that was all I had to say. Any rate, does anybody have, if people have anything else that we want to go over for now? Like I said, we can come back next week.
Yeah, I got one more thing I'd like to.
Sure, go for it.
Which is probably controversial, but delete NPC militia corps.
So, okay, I'm gonna come across as strongly opposed to that, but I'm interested in hearing your argument. My argument for them is the fact that I personally believe that faction warfare is the best place to send newer players who are interested in kind of taking up the next step of EVE Online.
So you want to send a new player to, for example, nullsec. How would you go about that?
I'm not trying to send a new player to nullsec. I'm trying to send them into faction warfare. What I'm saying is that
you want to send them on their own to work things out for themselves in, for example, IC24th or TLA, where the majority of militia are going to instantly accuse them of being a spy or a farmer.
So
why would you not point them towards a player corp where they can be mentored through their faction warfare journey?
I think that that does point them towards a null. You can't. I don't believe that CCP should be pointing people to individual corporations, player corporations. But that's my point. If you join the militia, then that opens your, it gets you out there doing stuff, and invariably you will encounter a player organization that will suck you in. And then now,
why should you not encounter the player corporations from day one? Like, you can't. Well, you can potentially go to low sec and just be a pirate on your own in an NPC corp, but why would you?
But my point is that, so okay,
that would get the player corporations to up their game, and then you would have like the low sec equivalents of Horde or Karma Fleet, but pulling people to faction warfare. Something that, for example, Fwedit did years ago.
I'm not convinced that doesn't happen. I don't know.
On the flip side of the coin, what if you don't want to deal with the politics of being in a player corp, but you still want to participate in faction?
Make your own corp.
So okay, let me say my argument. So like, a new player comes into the game, they run the Abyss, they do that kind of stuff, they gain their confidence in PvP, and then so now they want to go do PvP, but they don't know, like, they don't have anybody to be doing it with or whatever, so they join the militia and they just go and start running some plexes. Invariably, they will run into members of their own militia, and there is an incentive. I understand that some people will have the response of spy, but there is an incentive for faction warfare corps to absorb people. So eventually you're going to be in a plex and run into another dude that's in the same militia as you, and that they could recruit you. So it's a natural progress that goes from I don't know anything about the game to I know about the game to I'm doing something in the game, and now it's a natural conduit to find other people that are of like mind, and so effectively trick the player into putting themselves in a position where they get absorbed into an actual organization.
After you fix their overview.
I just think that you look at the models of things such as Horde and EVE Uni, RVB, that kind of stuff, hugely successful. Why aren't CCP, instead of kind of just kind of gently nudging people towards faction warfare through the agency or whatever, why don't they integrate services such as EVE jobs into that kind of thing, and point people from a very early stage towards places where they can find reliable recruiting corporations?
What would you like to see that is different than the current corporation recruitment panel?
how many corporations do you know that actually recruit via their in-game methods?
But that's the point, right? What you're suggesting. So what could be done differently that would make it so it wouldn't just be that? What different thing beyond what already exists would make that happen?
So, actually mentioning third-party services such as the Reddit recruitment for new jobs in the MPE, that would be a pretty good idea in my eyes.
I got an idea.
I don't really think CCP playing favorites with any corporation is a good thing.
Yeah, none of these organizations that you mentioned got where they are by being promoted artificially by CCP.
Right. You could have something, say, like in the agency where, you know, if you're going through faction warfare space and you're in the New Bro Corp or whatnot, be like, hey, these are some faction warfare corps that have their home system set, you know, in this constellation or this region.
Yeah,
That'd be pretty interesting.
if you're gonna display any options, you kind of have to display all options in the interest of fair, which would
so
be
like
hard.
the agency could have a thing that says corporations with head offices near to where I am.
Yeah, something
I mean,
like
I
that.
guess there could be definitely some UI improvement to the recruitment board, and I think that there are some of that stuff coming with like looking for fleet and other like friendship machine level stuff, as it were, as Hilmar would put it. That might make that into a thing.
I don't really see a problem here existing because we still have the normal militia chat unless you've completely ignored it, set it on unblink and put it aside. You can throw in your corporate ads there, you can recruit there, your fleets can be open to the militia or just to whatever. You have options to pull in new players already if you haven't taken steps accordingly to recruit. That, I think you're dropping the ball because those things are already.
Yeah, Aderon, I don't feel like we ever had a problem fueling our engine by recruiting people out of militia. Like once people actually got into the militia, that was we could get them. It was the people that like stayed in HighSec and hadn't even joined faction warfare at all yet. Those were the ones that were difficult to reach, because the problem is that those other organizations that you just mentioned control the narrative. And so, and then you have other little things like the standings issue. So people just think that faction warfare isn't a thing to join. And so if they never try, then they're never going to join you. So I think that the key would be to lower the barrier to entry to faction warfare, remove any of the concerns that somebody might have with trying faction warfare, incentivize small dip your toe into faction warfare, and then allow the systems of uniting people with corporations that naturally exist within the system, let them play themselves out.
I just think it's interesting to discuss other options of getting people into corp.
I agree. I mean, it's interesting. Now, again, this actually goes into like that feedback thing, right? So like if every week or every month there's a special like leaderboard type thing, like a report that's put out about the faction warfare efforts. This could be even player built, but it'd be better if it was in game. That allows people to kind of see. So now it's no longer CCP playing favorites and just saying like, oh, Aderon Robotics, they say that they do faction warfare and they've been here for a little while, so we're going to promote them, and then have everybody mad at them because they chose one guy over another. Instead, literally just promote, hey, this is the corp that got the most loyal victory points. These guys captured this system, you know, all these different things. Showcase the things people are doing as a mechanism of showcasing the people. Not necessarily just saying, hey, new bro, you should totally join this corp.
Should totally join D&G though.
I don't disagree. You can join D&G. That's a good one. But
while we were talking, I was just busy rinsing Hoplite.
again, I don't like anything that stops people from joining I don't think we need to put any more barriers into joining faction warfare and taking part in faction warfare. Because, like, I guess my question is, if you time the amount of time that somebody can be in the militia, or you remove somebody from the militia, what does that solve? What does that do that's better than what exists now?
It stops people.
I don't
mission
understand
hopping
the
so
question.
regularly.
Hold on, what was that? Was it Tristan that gave an answer?
That was Orib.
Oh, no, I heard you give an answer.
Oh, yeah, I was saying that it just kind of reduces how often people can militia hop to the winning side.
Ah.
Yeah, yeah. If you don't have restrictions or your restrictions are very low, I mean, I think as for piracy, where you are in terms of your security status, I think those fears are grossly exaggerated because of clone soldier tags are already there. They're not that cheap. That is a really it's an option anyone can use to bring down their sex status, and it's not going to jump up dramatically if you dip your toes. As for your faction standings, how are you otherwise going to deal with AWOCs? We have to have some kind.
Yeah, and again, so, I mean, like, the fact that, so the number one reason why I get given that somebody doesn't join faction warfare is they go, wait, doesn't that mean I'll get locked out of Caldari space? And, like, can't I permanently tank my Caldari standings? And that's, and even if you pretty much have to do missions, like I was in faction warfare for years and I still can go into all of the different spaces, right? So there are definitely ways to do it, but the fact that that problem exists causes people to not even try it. And so if we're not going to defeat the narrative, there has to be something that makes it so that it's like, no, man, that's not true. It's actually this way. And right now that doesn't actually exist.
I think the flip side to the standing
And tags doesn't work either, because we're not talking about security. We're talking about your standings with an opposing race. So, like, can I burn myself to make it so that my character can just never go to a Mars space again? That is what prevents people.
But that's a misinformed perception. Like, that's my problem with it a little bit. I do understand what you're saying, but it's like, that's not the case. You can repair your standings, and I argue that me repairing my Galente standings so I could get back into, like, the space where my character was, like, from, like, I don't know, I think that added an element of, like, when I was doing that, sure, it was a pain to do those missions and do what I had to do to get the standing back, but that was, like, I don't know, it added something to it.
I think that either there needs to be a much more straightforward way of getting the standing back, or, because, I mean, it is true that if you tank your actual, like, faction standing with an empire, that is a giant ask to rebuild.
Yes.
That only affects people who are themselves active on that character in faction 1.
Right.
It doesn't affect the people who stick a mission pulling ult in every faction and then just go and run it on their non-FW main once their mission puller has come and opened the mission for them.
Right, but
that's the kind of behavior that gets the backup of people who actually put time and effort into plexing systems, pushing war zones, and being a person in faction warfare who contributes.
right, but my question is, can we somehow get a system that convinces people that they can go and do that without necessarily causing, because the problem is that especially a newer player has this natural aversion to doing something that they feel might permanently lock themselves out of something. Even if you say that there's alts, even if, you know, they don't even like the fact that they can temporarily be locked out of something. So the idea that, like, I'm making a decision now that will limit my choices later is a proposition that a lot of people will just reject outright. So how do we get it so that that's not the way it's framed?
One of the biggest solutions to issues with standings would be if anyone who enters a Plex gets a suspect timer.
You know,
It
that's
doesn't matter who they are, then you can shoot them. It's fine.
well. Again, we're not talking
That's
about
fair.
security standings, first of all. And so the biggest culprit when it comes to these faction standing losses is actually missions, right? So,
But yeah, we're going to delete them. So it's fine.
right,
The
yeah. So
ride
if you,
standings.
if you get rid of missions, then that actually fixes that problem by itself. But barring that, like I said, I'm not worried about standings because standings security, because security has tags for sec. Like that's a very straightforward fix.
And if you're that keen on fixing your faction standings, you can just do data centers.
Once.
Yeah, no, I'm coming in somewhere in the middle here because I do think you have a point, Ash. But
And
I'm
you've
still-
got the SOE arc every 3 months.
3 months.
Yeah, and maybe it's
Just
a matter of
inform
making those
people.
things
Let
better.
them know.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if you leave faction warfare, there should be some kind of thing where you get an amnesty, but you can't rejoin a faction for a set period of time if you take that amnesty to reset your standings to 0.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Can I ask how long were you in faction warfare where you had to repair your corporation, your faction standings for
Me?
Galente? Yeah.
I was in faction warfare for about 2 years, a little bit over 2 years.
Did you run missions or purely Plex or how does it?
I did missions, and I also like to blow up pods. I like to pop people.
Because I get faction hits too when people roam the low sec with inside NPC corporate still.
Well, you get some pretty significant losses against your so as you kill rats, and it used to be a lot worse when the plexes were full of rats, but now that you basically don't have to kill very many rats for in the process of plexing, it's not as bad. I do like the idea that like there's a cooling off period, and then maybe you know you can. I just think
Pass
that
freely through.
I just think that there needs to be a better path towards repairing that isn't completely janky, because all those solutions do exist, but they're all kind of janky in their own way, to be honest. Like there's nothing that tells you that you can run the SOE missions every 3 months and that that's the way to do it. Like data centers are totally hidden, and like I don't know, like I would like to see a better way of repairing that standings if destroying it is such an integral part of taking part in the activities.
There could be something very easily in the faction warfare menu itself that says if you choose to leave your militia at any time, you can do so either leave now and that's that, or leave now and not rejoin for 3 months, and all your enemy faction standings will be reset to 0.
Or maybe have like a specific reparations that will fix only standings that were lost and incurred in the.
Hey, kind of like that, yeah.
But either way, I think that removing those things that cause people to not want to do it, and the number one thing that I get asked, especially being a Galente, right? So I get asked, wait, does that mean I don't get to go to Jita? Like the idea that even with an alt, because a lot of people just don't like the idea of alts on the outset, and yes, you know, understanding that you're going to use an alt if you're going to be in low sec and doing faction warfare anyways, that is a lesson that they have to learn. But this idea where it's like, yes, you are going to be locked out of Jita, and you might be locked out of Jita forever, like that answer box a lot of people.
Tough. This is Eve, and your actions have consequences.
I mean, it's easy to say tough, but when
yes,
you
it is.
when you want,
I agree though.
But when you want people to come and actually do the thing,
I know.
And us informing them, we will only get to so many people. CCP has to make a system that lets people know what this thing, what this entails.
You get 3 character slots per account for a reason.
I like that.
On the subject of kind of standings and things like that, you guys have done faction warfare for a while. You know that you shoot people, you very quickly become -10. and you very quickly lose standings, especially when you are faced with a situation of kind of LP leechers, AWOXers, that kind of stuff. People you've set to red because you know damn well they're going to shoot you first. So you shoot them first.
Right.
But now the war deck changes have happened, and the only way that we, for example, as an Amar corporation, can war deck another Amar corporation is I have to go and anchor a citadel in HiSec. For a
Oh my
corporation who's
gosh.
predominantly -10,
Mm-hmm.
who therefore can't go to HiSec without being shot by NPCs.
Hmm.
So when I am faced with a situation of a corp that wants to come to Amar faction warfare and AWOX them, and they've got all their standing ults in place, so they can AWOX to their heart's content. But I can't war deck them because I don't want to put a fucking citadel in HiSec.
So what you need to do,
What am I going to do now?
what you need to do is sponsor a HiSec corporation that you can basically turn into a feeder corp for you. So they get to be war deck immune, and the stations are in your name. And then
So I have to make a HiSec or have a HiSec war deck corp, but they can war deck,
What?
so they are the offenders in the war deck, which means that my corp who wants to shoot these people can't assist because you can only assist a defender, not the guys who make the war deck.
no, what I'm saying is that you put a dirt and glitter citadel in HiSec, and then let like for instance, Mauro doesn't own its own structures because Mauro's war deck immune. So we have other people who are friends that are scary and have teeth that own the citadels, and then we have an agreement with them.
Getting this thing here. So dirt and glitter, we have our own structures. They're all in low sec. But
Right.
to actively to be the aggressor in a war, you need a war deck HQ.
Yes.
in high sec.
Yes, and what I'm saying is that
So
you can
for
put one in
example,
HiSec, and then have
Yeah,
a bunch of
I put one in
HiSecers
HiSec.
maintain it.
I can't defend it because we're all flashy pirate bad boys.
I mean,
So there's a corp in Amar called Imperial Navy AWOXers who belong to an offspin of Smile and Wave. If I want to war deck Imperial Navy AWOXers, I have to put a citadel in HiSec. Now these guys camp Jita a lot, so they are, of good HiSec standings. They know how to put a Nestor ult in Jita and spawn all the faction waves. So they could very easily go to my chosen system, shoot my Astra House, which is my war deck HQ, which I can't defend because we're all flashy pirates,
right.
and thus end the war deck.
That seems like a pretty big oversight for the new war deck mechanics, to be honest.
Yeah, it's. I mean, like, I guess my point is that there are technically solutions to that problem, but you're right, it is kind of bogus. So first of all, I want to not first of all, but I want to take a step back real quick and respond to some of the people in chat, because I think that some people might have like come in the middle of it and so not fully understand what we're talking about. We are explicitly talking about things from a faction warfare lens. So when we're talking about missions and removing missions, we're talking specifically about faction warfare missions, not general missions. And when we talk about not being able to go to Jita, we're talking about faction warfare members who are now, like if you're in the Galente militia, you're at war with the Caldari, therefore you're not allowed in Caldari space, which includes Jita. Faction warfare, just taking another step back, faction warfare is a mechanic in which you can align yourself, your alliance, or your corp with one of the 4 empires who are in conflict with each other, and they're not allowed to fight each other, so they use us as a proxy combat. So there is a set of systems for the Amar Mimitar militia, and there is a set of systems for the Caldari Galente militia, and so the players compete for system ownership of these low-sec systems on behalf of their representative empire, and then get paid for it. Sorry, carry on. I just wanted to make sure that the chat was totally caught up with what we're talking about. But like, yeah, you can see from here, like, So these are all the systems owned by the Galente Federation, and they're various degrees of contested. So if a Caldari militia member comes to this system here and starts running the what's called plexes, King of the Hill sites, like these novice, large, small, and medium that exists here, if somebody went there and started running these sites, they would get rewards, and this contested value would go up. And when the contested value hits maximum, 100%, then that system becomes vulnerable, and then that team can then take that system for their own side. Why are they called plexes? Because they're complexes. Even though most of them are called outposts. Because we in EVE Online like to call everything plexes. Yeah, no, I gotta say, man, as a total aside, these faction warfare, these war deck changes has caused a ton of edge case problems, man. Holy crap. So just yesterday, we had a thing where somebody stole loot from our invasion. Somebody shot the loot stealer, and then somebody repped the guy who shot the loot stealer. The guy who repped the guy was allegedly green, and he's the kind of guy who knows what he's talking about. So if he says he's green, I kind of believe him. But he still was able to inherit the normal like Capsuleer tag, but that made it so that we could not rep one of our own Logi. So it like created this systemic problem that spiraled through the entire fleet and broke our capability of doing the PvE content in order to try to deal with the thief. Like it makes some fun, weird, bad edge cases now. Either way, anything else we want to cover? Because this conduit got stabilized, so I kind of want to bring. I kind of want to jump back in.
If no one has anything else, can I throw out the system of I'm proposed like an adjacent kind of system where it's kind of based on attacking neighboring system, but it doesn't prohibit you from attacking back. I posted it up on Reddit and on the official forum, and I'm not sure if you read it yet, Ash, but what it basically is each system that finds itself neighboring one system is going to apply a defensive or an offensive bonus depending on its faction, which faction possesses. And this is where I tried to introduce a passive modulator that kind of reduces the contested rate depending on how many friendly systems are surrounding the system or their enemy control system. They increase the value of each single objective that's being taken. So you can take over a system in a relatively shorter time period if you attack surrounding first, or as you progress through the war zone, kind of like a front line. Each system that you take, the following system is the one that was taken before flip. So you go on, creates kind of a domino.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting compromise between like hard lines of adjacent lines of battle and not being able to operate between the back-end systems or covertly, and the opposite, which is you can just go anywhere. I could support that idea as a compromise.
I think going back to my like faction warfare gets special bonuses that only apply to that faction structures or whatever. Like the idea, I think it could be cool that striking behind the main war lines is striking at their infrastructure, whereas striking at the edges of the war zone or like at the battle lines is taking territory. So maybe like you can disrupt their bonuses in a better way, but not necessarily threaten to take the system. I don't know. It's hard to feel that one out, because it's a pretty dramatic change overall.
Yet it's one that actually solves the problem of a deplexing system, and actually makes dead-end systems, the ones that only have a single connection, what most people like waters, and not just really remote constellation. Those become important because they're easier to flip. They're less influenced by multiple adjacent systems because there's only one system that's attached to them or linked to them. As for attacking assets and infrastructure, that involves a big change with upwell structure or citadels themselves. There's no way around that unless you make some kind of hard change.
What I'm saying is that, so like maybe those upgrades would be tied to new flex structures, so those things could be struck at. But I don't know. I mean, I don't. Whatever. Now we've hit way down the weeds. I think that one of the things that I'd be really interested in is collecting a bunch of ideas about what we would like to see happen. Things like Plex rollback, things like, border, whatever. And it'd be interesting to see if we could convince CCP to... Dirt and Glitter is recruiting. Thank you for following. I'd be interested to see if we could get like CCP to come, like, go through our list and basically give a very broad categorization of things. Like, this would be a huge change, so we could theoretically do it, but it would be like an expansion level change. This is impossible. We're not going to do, because like we can sit here and debate how great it would be for the contested borders, whatever, but if it's not technically feasible, then it doesn't matter how many people like the idea. So it'd be nice to know, like, have certain of our ideas that we kick around all the time be ruled out. You know what I mean?
That would be great. I haven't gotten any official feedback on it, but if anyone wants to check it out and goes to the Cross Faction Discord, you can find it under the sub channel that's called Total Rework. And
Can you repeat that again? Sorry, somebody just followed right at the exact same time that you were talking, and so I want the people in chat to be able to hear what you said.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. I didn't hear anybody else. If you want to find I made a comprehensive write-up. I thought I was being brief, but it looks like the opinion is very long. But the numbers are there. The idea of adjacency is presented, and I linked it in the cross-faction Discord under the sub-channel Total Rework Ideas. And you can find it in there. I'll also add it to the Reddit and the forum subtext channels. If anyone, check it out.
Yeah, I got it. I will post it in my chat. Yes, Group Hug, his mic is in fact a potato, as it turns out.
But it works.
Hey, it's good enough for GLaDOS. It's good enough for him.
Right now.
Well, that's fine. What he was saying is that he's collected all of his ideas into one big forum post, which is the one that I just linked. So if you're interested in what he's saying, which is a very comprehensive idea about what to do, and I can say Orb has been in faction warfare for quite some time and has definitely put a lot of chewing on the problem. So it's worth a read. But yeah, I think, like I said, we can come back next week and talk a little bit more if we would like. But I like the idea of like touching base and just chatting like this as regularly as we can.
Yeah, definitely.
And I really, like I said, I don't necessarily need CCP to commit to any given change. What I would like to see them do is strike out changes. I mean, like, tell us what isn't going to happen. That'd be neat. So that way we can, like, maybe work on alternatives.
Ash, I forget, are you CSM in this term?
Nope.
Did you run?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I ran once like years ago.
Gotcha.